On the top of the crevice, Kong and the Styracosaurus bellow at each other, but never touch. Kong punching a fist onto the ground as challenge, tempting the dinosaur to leap over. Back in the pit, some of the sailors grab sticks and other melee weapons like their knives to defend themselves, but they all fall. One lizard climbs up from the pit and attempts to attack the hiding Jack. It must have smelled him. Jack quickly cuts the vine it's climbing on, and it falls back into the horrible war zone / feeding ground that is the pit that Jack had no choice but to witness from a bird's eye view. The clattering of the reptilian creature falling sends Kong's focus in Jack's direction. He looks over but can't see into the cavern. He can only see the insects eating in the murky depths, so he reaches his hand down and tries to feel for something. Jack falls back, and you can see the wheels in both of their heads turning. Across the ravine, Carl seems frozen in an angry shock, just staring down into the pit, knowing he can't get his camera back, and it was virtually all for nothing. It's a half-selfish, half-guilty reason. On the one hand, his film won't get made. On the other hand, he is responsible for the deaths of all these sailors, and nothing of value will come out of it. Billy is in the corner crying his eyes out, covering his mouth so he won't make a sound. Just a few whimpers and gasps escape him. The Styracosaurus looks down, hearing the whimper, but can't reach, and doesn't see anything. It eventually gets bored, scowls at the curious Kong, thinking he's dumb for trying to reach for Jack, and walks off. Carl looks up and his facial expression changes. He is concerned for Jack, but at the same time he's observing Kong. This mythical being with so much mystery behind it turned out to be a giant fucking ape. But maybe it can't be a waste. He's still a wondrous being that people would love to see. Jack unsheaths his knife and lifts it. When the hand comes down for him, he stabs at it a couple of times, his nerves getting to him, and Kong jumps back. To him, it must feel like a bee sting, but he notices the cuts and blood on his hand and pouts a bit. But he tries again. Now he's dead set on getting this guy, but Jack stabs him again, and he pulls back once more, and shakes his hand to ease the pain. He then roars in a rage and shakes his head while holding on to the edge of the ravine, and shakes himself like a wrestler testing the ropes. Back with Anne in the tree, she sees a flock of prehistoric birds or pterodactyls flying away from something, and a curious horror takes hold of her. In the distance, a lumbering creature walks into view. Her eyes go wide when she notices it's a T-Rex. It's not looking at her as it scratches its head with its stubby arm before noticing a weird yellow blur in the tree to its left, and it turns and stares at her. Her eyes widen even more, and the scene where Carl directed her to scream comes full circle, because as this T-Rex processes this more and more, so does she. And her eyes go wider and wider as she looks up at it. She's amazed and horrified, and helpless. But maybe if she can scream, someone or something could help her. She'll take anything. She looks around the tree she's in and tries to find a weapon to defend herself, but finds nothing but a nest with prehistoric eggs in it. One hatches and reveals a baby pterodactyl. It's slimy, and out of instinct, she lets out a little shriek, jumps back, and flips the nest out of the tree, and sadly, the baby and other eggs fall to their deaths. But that sudden move motivates the T-Rex more as it speeds up its walk. Now she registers as prey. Although her lungs seem paralyzed, she throws her arms around her eyes and screams for her life. Back at the ravine, they all hear this, but Kong is the only one able to act on it. He looks back and forth from the ravine to where the scream came from, back to the ravine. He roars at it as if to say, "This isn't over," and runs back to Anne. The T-Rex stomps up to Anne, opening its mouth, and that's when Kong jumps in and slugs it in the face. Its head goes all the way to the ground, and its ass and tail goes up. It then adapts and swings its tail around and whips Kong in the face, leaving a scar. It proceeds to bite Kong's leg, which trips him. The T-Rex lifts itself back up and waves its tail on the floor back and forth like a snake for intimidation. Kong looks up at Anne, and Anne is watching in a horrified awe. The sight of her motivates him to get back up, and in response to the tail wag, he retorts with a pound to his chest and a wave of his hands towards himself, as if saying to come on and have a go if the Rex thinks it's hard enough. The T-Rex slinks its tail on the floor trying to trip Kong again, but Kong jumps and stomps on the tail. Kong lifts his fists like a boxer. The T-Rex whips its tail back, and you could see their primal heads thinking of a strategy. As Kong slowly sets up his punch, he reaches his fist over, and the T-Rex snaps at Kong each time with its teeth. Kong shoots his hand back each time before finally going in for it and socking the T-Rex in the face with a right hook. The T-Rex goes down and attacks Kong's left arm, sinking its teeth into his furry bicep. Kong screams as they begin to grapple. Kong's long arms and the T-Rex's stubby claws push at each other until they both push each other off, and Kong accidentally falls into the tree that Ann is in. The tree falls over as Ann screams, and much like Triple H at WrestleMania 33, that makes Kong mad. And speaking of wrestling, Kong tries a new tactic. First, he rips a small tree from its roots and tries to shove it down the Rex's throat, but it kicks Kong off and repositions itself. Kong recovers and runs up the Rex's tail onto its back. He gives it a few punches before putting it in a chokehold. Ann's legs are stuck under the tree, and she is now next to the remains of the pterodactyl nest, which is a gross mess of fluids to say the least. The roars these animals make are ungodly loud, and she has no choice but to cover her ears. Kong tries to keep the T-Rex's mouth shut like a muzzle, but it breaks free, so Kong goes to the other extreme. He begins to pull the Rex's mouth open. It clamps back down a couple of times and bites Kong's finger. He does the shaking hand motion he did with Jack earlier to ease the pain. Once he's ready, he plunges his hand into the T-Rex's mouth again. He begins to pry the Rex's mouth open as the dinosaur's roar changes to a high-pitched roar that's more in pain as you hear its jaw begin to snap. You even see the strips of flesh and muscle connecting the jawbone together beginning to stretch past its limit and snap. Kong is so into it he can't keep balance and he slips off onto the floor, bringing the Rex down with him. But Kong adjusts and flips the Rex around and gets on top of it. Kong is now standing, and although the Rex is fighting, it's no use as Kong finally tears its jaw open, blood leaking out. He finishes it off by crushing its dislocated top jaw. With a crunch, it's over, but although Kong is a giant terror gorilla, he's not that bright, and he begins to play with the dead body like a little monkey or a child. Opening and closing the jaw and shaking at it, dropping it on the floor and wondering why it won't get up, or perhaps making sure it's down for the count like a prehistoric referee. When he realizes it's dead, pride takes over him as he begins to bang his chest and roar before ending it with a kingly pound of both fists on his chest twice. Ann is astounded by this, not quite frightened of Kong anymore, more fascinated with him. Kong looks around for Ann and sees she's stuck under the tree. He walks up to her and smiles as he lifts the tree up like it was a toothpick, and instead of picking her up like a human ragdoll, he puts an open palm out to her, giving her the option to come with her. And oddly enough, she does. Something registers with her that she is probably under the protection of the most deadly creature on the island, an unbeatable force of nature, the eighth wonder of the world. Plus, if she didn't accept, Kong is still an animal, so he'd probably just take her anyway. They walk off together and roam further into the jungle, with a new understanding for each other growing. When the coast is clear, Jack, Carl, and Billy crawl out of their caves back to land. Billy falls and grips the grass, glad to feel solid land, then rips the grass out of the dirt by its roots out of emotion. Carl picks him up sternly and looks over to Jack. "What are you gonna do?" Carl asks. Jack pauses, but he knows exactly what he's gonna do. "I'm going after him and getting Ann back," Jack says confidently. Carl nods. "Right. I'll tell Englehorn to wait until you return, but I don't know how long he'll allow it. So make it fast, and Godspeed." "I'll try." "Thanks," Jack answers. They both begin to walk off, but then Carl turns around and adds, "Hey, Jack." Jack stops and turns around. "Yeah? When you bring back Ann, bring the big guy with you." "What?" Jack asks, confused. "You heard me," Carl says as he walks off, Billy in front of him, head down. Carl wonders what he's even thinking. It doesn't matter what Jack does. The moment Kong knows Ann is gone, he'll chase after her. There's no way to avoid it. But when Kong comes, they'll be ready.